Excuse me. Hello.
I guess you're
Good morning.
Mics are working. Very good.
Mics are working.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. We're glad that you could join us for our session. We are talking today about how retailers can win more digital advertising dollars. And so we've got a great panel assembled. I think we're going to have a really good discussion. And we're glad that you chose to join us. Just as we get started, this session is sponsored by C-Value. And we are a company that provides a SaaS platform that uses AI to help retailers and suppliers collaborate better to understand customers and grow customers. And so that's certainly a big part of our topic today. We also do insight sharing and personalization. And we'll give you some info at the end about how you can connect with us. But before we dive into the discussion, I just want to quickly do some introductions so you know who you're with today. So to my right here, we have Martin Vatera, VP of Digital Sales at Rema 1000. So Rema is a client of C-Value and one of the leading supermarkets in Scandinavia. And so we're excited to hear Martin's perspective on the topic today. Next, we have Josh Goldman from Nielsen, VP Consumer and Media, and working with Walmart. And last but not least, Angela Venus, who's head of retail measurement, joining us from Facebook. So Angela, we're really glad that you're with us today too. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Joel Percy. I head our consulting practice at C-Value, working with our clients on the strategy side to help make sure they're getting the most out of our solutions around personalization and supplier collaboration. So now that you know who we are, we'll dive into the topic and get started. So to start, I think that it's not a surprise to anyone in this room that digital advertising has been growing at an incredible pace. 2019 was actually a big year in which it was the first year globally where digital spend passed traditional spend. And you can see the trend there in the coming years. That's obviously expected to continue at a fairly dramatic pace. In terms of where the ad dollars are going, it's not just a shift from traditional to digital. There's also a real move towards data that is tied closer and closer to the point of purchase. So if I can know your age and where you live, that's great. And if I can know what you've searched for, that's very helpful. But kind of the real value in the eyes of advertisers is shifting more and more towards the purchase. Where's the intent to buy, and what's the actual purchase history that I can use to really target ads? Because ultimately, obviously, in most cases, the purchase is the goal. And so the closer I can get to that point of purchase as an advertiser, the happier I'm going to be. Now, if you look at where the point of purchase data is, certainly some of it is online, and e-commerce is a key thing going forward. But if you want purchase data, it is still largely in bricks and mortar. 86% globally of retail still happening in bricks and mortar. And if you look at something like food, the number is even higher. And so when we're talking about purchase data, yes, there's a lot we can do online. But as an advertiser, if I'm looking for purchase data, I need to be in bricks and mortar and using that data. And so if you want bricks and mortar data, where do you go? You go to bricks and mortar retailers. And so we see this trend on a very, very large scale of retailers jumping into the digital advertising game. Now, in a sense, this is not brand new. A number of the names up here have been doing this for some time. But what is new is the pace and the intensity. And so it's not just that retailers are saying, I'm doing this a little bit on the side, and I may be able to get some more supplier dollars by monetizing my media and doing a little bit of digital advertising here and there. We're talking about spinning off businesses. We're talking about branded divisions. We're talking, scaling up and hiring at a massive rate. And so, I think in the past 12 months in my inbox, I just feel like every couple weeks I'm getting this announcement of another retailer that is starting a media business in a very serious and intentional way. And so we want to talk about that opportunity, and we want to talk about what it looks like as a retailer to say, I want to be in that space, right? We're all looking for more ad dollars. We're all looking for greater investment from suppliers. And if this is the trend, And some of these names on the screen are obviously big names, and they're there in a big way already. How can I be a part of that? And so that's really the focus of the conversation today, and I think we're going to get some good different perspectives. We've got a good range of kind of backgrounds and experiences here. So we have 4 questions that we want to work through. And the first is just, what do advertisers want? If I'm a retailer saying, okay, I want to throw my hat in the ring, and I want to be in the consideration set for CPG suppliers and other vendors potentially who are looking to advertise digitally, what is it that they're looking for? And the first answer we might give straight off the top is data. Data is king, and that's obviously the key to this. Retailers are going to be selling data and looking to monetize around specific targeted personalized ads to consumers, but not all data is created equal. And so one of the trends that we see is that it's not just about the number of customers that you have or the number of loyalty IDs or the amount of transaction history, but there's also a question around engagement level. If I have an audience of 1 million customers that are mindlessly swiping a card every time they go through POS and they don't know what they're getting and they're not engaging online, and I have another 1 million customers who are engaging in digital and redeeming and interacting, the second audience is going to be much more attractive to advertisers. And so that's where we start. And I want to start with Martin and just ask if you can share a little bit about what's happening at Rema. You guys are doing some really interesting things in terms of how you create that engaged audience at a retailer. So,
thanks, Joel. I want to start with Rema has a slogan that loosely translated to English is "Simplicity is king." As we all know, if something is easy, then it probably has to be some work done before. And I want to show an example of this with our 10 on 10 concept. So basically, our customers get 10% off on the 10 most frequently bought products. It's easy and simple to understand for customers. It's a great tool for us to build brand awareness, but also it's a great one-to-one marketing tool for us. This little video here shows you how the customers interact with the app to either keep products on the list or change them. So actually, the customers are helping us creating relevant discounts for them. And I think going forward, this mindset of the one-to-one dialogue is truly the critical part here to understanding our customers. And this is where technology can help us, creating more fun, more authentic concepts, and helping us deliver on our vision with 1 million handshakes throughout digital experiences with our customers. Because I think also if we can create that sense of ownership to our customers, that they feel like the app is their own little key to their own little Rema store, then I really think we're onto something, aren't we? And this takes me back to the legacy of Rema, if you guys don't know this, who know Rema. We're now started with this little tiny store here. We're now part of an international brand or international chain. We are almost 1,000 privately owned stores now. Our success is in duplicating that sense of ownership that this store here started with. So therefore, an important part of our culture is empowering each and every merchant that we have to making our customers happy, our staff happy, our extended part of family happy. That's their job. And I think if we also can get the message across to our customers that they will have the same sense of ownership that we have for our stores, then that has to be some really big goal for us going forward. And I think the digital experiences that we are creating now is helping it, or at least will play a major part of that success going forward.
That's great. So it's giving customers the choice, it's giving them a really smooth experience and that sense of ownership. So
correct.
That's a great kind of foundation to build on. I'm going to go, Angela, now to you, and just back to this question of what is it that you think advertisers are looking for in the space today?
Yeah, I think I rephrased that a little bit right and kind of asked the question of what do consumers want? Because I think fundamentally advertisers want to deliver what consumers are looking for. And building off of what Martin was describing, consumers want personalization. So just recently I ran into some stats. That's what I do for fun, is read research. And in this particular survey that Salesforce had executed, they were finding that 91% of consumers say that they are more likely to interact with a brand that they feel is delivering relevant product offerings and personalized experiences. And they really love that idea of artificial intelligence and any kind of automation that can help enable that kind of personalization. So I think building off of everything that has been said here, personalization, that's what consumers want. And I think advertisers really want to be able to deliver that too.
That's great. That's great. So we're building this engaged audience. We're understanding what they want and delivering that personalization. And then I think all of us have probably experienced, digital advertising that has been done really well, and all of us have experienced advertising that has been done poorly. So I want to kind of switch and go to Josh and just try to understand this question of, once we have the data and the audience and we're trying to do these activations, how do we do it better? What does good look like, and what are some of the things we need to be thinking about as we go through that?
Great. Thanks, Joel. So just a little bit of perspective. This is some material Nielsen had compiled from different stats, ours, and other industry. And it gives a little bit more surround to the shift that Joel had mentioned earlier in terms of the move to the growth of digital advertising. Certainly that's helped Angela and Facebook very much. They're a big part of that move. But also some of the change in the way we think about advertising at retail and what's creating some of the media opportunity for retailers to really be essentially publishers. And the way to think about this chart is that the two sides are really moving towards the middle in many ways. Not completely to sort of the SVOD model or the sort of streaming model, but fundamentally you have an increase in what you could call addressable media, which means I can do something more than say I want female or male of a certain age and gender. And so what's happening generally in the industry and what's really powered a lot of the growth of digital advertising is I can be a lot more precise about who am I actually trying to reach as a specific audience. So do I want certain kinds of category buyers? Do I want certain kinds of lapsed buyers? Do I want loyal buyers? And you see really a merging of what have been the growth of addressable media, as it would be termed, both through digital and now video advertising, as well as for retailers, and loyalty programs are a good example, where you have a way to understand who the customer is, what they've been buying, what they might be interested in, and you can bring suppliers into that mix, the manufacturers who work with you in the retail stores. And what you have is this kind of merge towards a larger pool in total of this spend that is available and addressable. And in a lot of ways, the media efforts that some of the companies that Joel had listed earlier are really premised on the idea that retailers have very important and valuable information about a large group of audiences and their purchase interests. What have they been buying? What might they want to buy more? And for those people who sell goods, which are many, many manufacturers, they have a lot of interest in being able to reach that kind of an audience. So beyond age, gender, beyond lifestyle or interest, but known purchase activity. And that becomes a big part of what's emerging here, and will probably create a lot of merging between some of these spend pools that are listed on the chart here. And if we roll that forward to think about the different kinds of addressable advertising, there are many ways that advertisers can choose to target, and they use many different partners and different media publisher platforms to do that. And this has evolved and grown over the years as digital advertising has taken off and as the different forms of media and ad types and platforms have grown. And what we had done at Nielsen was a meta study. So we went and looked across a lot of the different ROI and attribution models that we've run for many of our manufacturer clients and their advertising spend. And we tried to actually equate what is the real return from different kinds of audience targets. So there are many ways to measure advertising. We'll talk about that in a minute. In this case, the key part we were focused on was return on investment. So the actual kind of I spend $1, how many dollars do I get back when I've reached that audience? How much do they end up buying of my products based upon exposure to the advertising? And what you see here there are a number that can be very effective. You have things like retargeting that is done very well in retail, for instance. On the far left of the screen, you'll see purchase-based. So what do we mean by that? That means I know that this consumer purchased these diapers in the last 3 months, or they purchased in category X of fresh foods. And so you have manufacturers, that's a high value audience, or they are a high purchase intent audience. They're searching on a retailer website. Those all represent key opportunities for advertisers to be much closer to point of purchase and to actually have an effect on the preference and choice the consumer makes. Those purchase-based audiences are far outperforming from an ROI standpoint some of the other forms of addressable advertising. That's great news for a retailer because you have really the best kind of purchase-based information potentially available. And that's part of what's driving folks like Walmart, Carrefour, Kroger, Target, et cetera, to take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. And so this idea of using purchase-based data is critical. And then I think that the next step is to say, just because we have purchase data, it doesn't mean we're automatically going to use it well. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about at C-Value and as we work with our clients is to be smart about how we're using the purchase data to really drive the customer growth. And a lot of it is about this shift from being reactive to predictive, right? Just because I have a list of things you've bought, it doesn't mean I'm going to do a great job of targeting ads to you. You know, a simple example, I recently bought a suitcase, and I'm now inundated with ads for suitcases. Well, I don't buy suitcases that often, right? You're showing me your ad for your suitcase at exactly the wrong time. I need one less than I've ever needed one in my life. So you're using purchase data, someone's using purchase data to target me, but they're getting it completely wrong. And so how can we take this history of a customer's purchases and then use the algorithms to not just say, I know what you did in the past, but I'm going to predict what's going to be the right thing to grow you going forward. And that's really kind of critical in this space, I think. We'll want to shift gears and talk now about a question that we always have when we're doing advertising and marketing, which is how are we going to measure the impact? And so we talked about this idea that digital advertising is trying to influence a purchase in the bricks and mortar world, and that creates some issues around how we're understanding the impact and what we're tracking. So I'll hand it over to Angela, and maybe you can kind of give us some thoughts on what does it look like to do measurement well?
Mm-hmm. First, I'll start by saying I think given the maturity of shopper initiatives that are getting activated on digital platforms, we do see a very diverse way that retailers are activating their data to deliver high-quality audiences, still broad audiences, and being smart about that. Given the diversity of executions that we see, different metrics are going to matter depending on what those tactics are trying to deliver. So things like audience delivery is still important to understand sort of, the scale of audiences that partners are able to reach. Brand metrics, right, can still be important. So think about the example of understanding whether you're driving enough awareness about a new line extension. So I wouldn't necessarily think about brand metrics in this case, but there are instances where that could be more relevant. Of course, like you mentioned, Joel, Holy Grail is still being able to connect digital touch points to transactions and taking a more omni-channel lens to that. So purchases that are happening in app or capturing purchases that are happening on your e-commerce website or in store, more importantly. I think just, putting that all together in terms of an omni-channel experience for consumers. One thing that I will say that's encouraging is that at least from the campaigns that we've been able to measure and examine recently, that value exchange between retailer and partners really comes to bear through the data. So we probably looked at close to 24 campaigns, and among those campaigns, 71% drive total incremental store sales for retailers. So very clear value to one partner. On the CPG side, 82% of those campaigns generated increased penetration in the products that are actually being promoted. So it's just really good to see that kind of value to all parties in this kind of exchange. Might be helpful for me to just kind of illustrate the types of campaigns that I'm talking about, right, in terms of supporting shopper marketing programs. The first that I'll share here is a little bit more in line with what Martin was describing earlier around, like, how do you build, and Joel as well, right, of how do you build that, that shopper pool, that highly engaged and loyal audience, because that translates into higher quality audiences for partners. And this is one scenario where HEB was introducing a new service, which is curbside and or curbside pickup or delivery of groceries. And because this was a new service offering, they were more focused on understanding or making sure that the message around that, the value proposition around curbside and delivery was really landing with their target audience. And so they saw a really good lift here in message association. And when it came to conversion metrics, they were more focused on early conversion metrics. So in this case, they are seeing higher trial rates from the people who saw the ad compared to people who didn't see the ad. So really good value here, but really focused on more of those initial sort of message association and really understanding and trialing this new service. The next example I'll illustrate is probably more familiar to many people, which is a lot more focused on near-term transactions. And I think what's really obvious in the content here is that Rite Aid really tried to remove the friction in that shopping experience. So you'll see that these products that are presented are personalized to every individual that's seeing this content in their feed. The shoppable button is there so that anybody who's ready to make that purchase online, that capability is already there. And so, of course, like really good news here is that Rite Aid was able to see, the metrics that they care about, like lift in the number of trips from consumers who are seeing the ad compared to those who weren't seeing the ad, and also larger basket sizes. So lots of different ways to execute and activate your data on digital platforms. The good news is that there's ways to measure across all the different tactics that are executed.
That's great. Thanks, Angela. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I just wanted to add, within the measurement framework, I think it's exactly right about understanding the sales and the total sales impact. It's also a lot about what the campaign objective is for the advertiser. So Angela mentioned the HEB. In the media example for retailer as a publisher, it will depend what that manufacturer is trying to achieve in their advertising. So are they, after creating greater awareness for a new product, utilizing the audience they can get to from the retailer, or are they trying to drive incremental sales? Sort of what is their campaign objective will also be a big guide to what are the right metrics in order to measure the effectiveness of the spend on the advertising.
Yeah, that's great. Very good. Kind of last topic we want to touch on here, which is a big one, and for any retailer that's kind of embarking down this path, this one is critical. And we recognize that people here from all around the world, different regulatory environments, different climate in terms of consumer expectations. So we just want to touch on this question of how we manage transparency and permission. As a customer, it is one thing if as a retailer you're using your own banner and your own channels to market to me things that I've bought in your store. And I think we're seeing larger and larger consumer acceptance of that and personalization in that arena. It's a next step to say, I bought something in this store over here, and I saw a digital ad on a platform that to me is completely unrelated, that clearly is tied to something I bought, and what's happening with my data, and how is this all happening behind the scenes. And that, I think, there's still a level of consumer concern, at least in some circles, about that. So how do we manage that? I want to share an example that I got recently as a customer. I'm based in Toronto, and so Loblaws has their PC Optimum program, and they have just launched Loblaw Media, where they're doing starting a new division doing exactly what we're talking about today. They sent me this email, and to me it is a fantastic example of walking the line right down the middle. It's not marketing, so they're not trying to promote anything to me, but it's also not buried in the T's and C's of something that I checked a box and didn't read. It's a very clear email that just answers a couple questions for me. So first of all, what's going to happen when you start using my data and selling it to advertisers? Well, they're telling me you're not going to see more ads, you're not going to be bombarded. It's just that the ones that you get should be smarter, okay? That's what you should expect as a consumer. Also, they're saying to me as a customer, we get that your data is valuable and we're actually going to pay you for it. So they're going to reward me with points for my consent to participate in this program. And I think increasingly we're seeing there's an awareness from consumers that their data is valuable, right? They're being asked for it on every side. And so this is acknowledging that. And then finally, just the reassurance that every customer wants. Are you giving my personal information? What's happening? And then, of course, there's a link there to opt out if you want to. And so this is just one example. But certainly to me, this represents kind of a best practice of if you're going to go down this road, you want to have a really defined strategy to be clear with customers about what's happening. because in today's world, these things can quickly spiral out of control if you put a foot, in the wrong direction. So, there's kind of one example of how this was executed by a retailer launching, specifically a digital ad business. Angela, anything to add on that, kind of from your perspective on this question of privacy and concern? Yeah.
And of course, I'm laughing. I have lots to add, but I think I will echo everything you just said, Joel, around really kind of boils down to that whole notion of transparency to consumers, right? Like the average smartphone user uses like 40 apps on their phone. So it's really hard to track like who even has that information, what that information is being used for, and what information actually is being collected. So I think the industry really is moving towards that notion of like transparency to consumers across the dimensions I just described. I think also important is that idea of control. So great that you know all this information and who's collecting and what's getting used for, but I think really instituting practices that allow the consumers to like clear that data if they don't want that information used. So I think transparency and control. I think the next challenge then for like particularly national operators or global operators is the fragmentation of the regulatory environment, right? So how do you sort of actually operationalize around that? Do you harmonize to the most rigorous standards? Do you try to institute technology kind of solutions, to have diversified sorts of parameters around privacy and control? So that's a debate I think that probably is still occurring in a lot of your own organizations, but I think transparency and control is sort of as operating principles.
Yeah, very good, very helpful, perfect. So I think there we've touched on a lot of topics and in some ways scratched the surface on some of them for sure, but hopefully given a bit of an overview of, as a retailer, if you're looking to get into this space, what are some of the big picture things you need to be thinking about? We do have a couple minutes for one or two questions, so if anyone has a question for any of our panelists, we've got some microphones at the back, and we'd be happy to take some questions if there are any. Yeah, we've got one here at the front. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Well.
How does the environment change? We talk about transparency and control and such. How does the environment change when you get into all of the devices that are in the market now? There's people who firmly believe that Alexa's listening to them, Google's listening to them, etc. Does that make the need to give consumers reassurance more critical as the environment evolves?
Is there anyone who wants to jump in and tackle that one? Or
I was just going to say that's exactly the increased complexity in the environment is I think what's actually brought this up to bubble up as I think it's always been there. The consumer awareness about it has just really surfaced and become more intense. And that is exactly what's kind of caused this concern around that. And I think more of an understanding from both companies that run this type of technology and regulators that there needs to be sort of a better system to kind of find that good intersection point between, hey, look, because businesses just want to deliver relevant messages too. And like I said earlier, like consumers want personalized messaging. So I think there's that intersection point. We just need to be better about, letting consumers know what's actually going on.
Yeah, very good. Sorry, I think.
We had a session yesterday where somebody actually was bringing up regulation and how unregulated technology is. So in that environment, government tends to create a one-size-fit-all solution to complex problems. How do you have to not just bring this to the consumer, what you're doing, how do you have to bring it to government to prevent, there's going to be some kind of regulation at some point, but to prevent that kind of one-size-fits-all kind of reactionary legislation from cramping your ability to innovate?
Yeah, I mean, I think to add my thoughts on that, my view is that wherever the regulatory environment you're in, complying is the baseline. But any retailer that says we've complied with all the regulatory requirements and then stops is in dangerous territory. So I think to me the conversation is to say, obviously, we need to comply. But the question is, let's engage with our shoppers and consumers and understand what they want, what feels good to them, and what's going to keep that relationship strong. And often that means exceeding the regulatory requirements, right? So we look at this example. This is not something that was legally required to be sent to me. It's a customer engagement piece, and I think done well. So I think that's kind of a good guideline for us to follow. Let's start by meeting the requirements, and then let's have the conversation of how do we make this a really good, positive experience for the customers whose data we're using. We're just at our time here, so thanks for being part of our session today. Just want to invite you to come and see us. If digital advertising and collaborating with your suppliers on this is something that is on your mind, we have some great tools to help with this on the collaboration side and around really smart targeting and personalization. We'd love to have a conversation with you at booth 1427. And I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate you being here today. Great insights, and you've really helped us get a good perspective on the topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you.